thing is how do you configure? That is what is more important. So as we were seeing in the last class, it's more from these template files and or the configuration files. So all we have to do is add these files properly in such a way that you have to define all your servers and what you have. Okay, so by default, you will be getting a dashboard, which you can use it with the Apache server what you have configured, and just go to the localhost Nagios where you have installed, and it should be pretty much able to see. Okay, so now in this, what you need to know is on the left hand side, if you see, it will be trying to show you some of the details what you have configured. So, for example, if you go to the host, you can see that it is trying to show the local host because, as you remember, all the config files what we have, right, the CFG files, now that has been using a template. So the template refers to the local host on which we have installed Nagios. So it itself is trying to show the server on which it is running. So right now it has configured the template for it, and it's saying that it is running fine. And internally, if you see, it is going to give you the complete details of what is happening, when was the last time the check happened. So it's going to give you all the details about the host. And at the same time, when you come down here, and if you see the services, these are nothing but the checks which has been put in the local host. So if you remember the localhost CFG, what we were seeing, there were a couple of services which we had set up, or by default it has put it. So these are the services and its corresponding output what it is trying to show us. Okay, so in order to understand this, what you need to literally know is the states. Okay, so now what happens is Nagios understands the states of the servers in these way. That is, it calls them as down, unreachable, recovery, and none. Okay, especially from the server. So what do you mean by this is, suppose if a server is completely down, it is not running, okay, then it uses a state called down, or simply it uses D. Okay, and whenever you are configuring the config file, if you remember, we used to use something called as DUR, or with respect to the states like U, W, CR, all those things. So what is representing is down. Down means it is completely not running. Okay, and R, which is called as recovery, or U stands for unreachable. Now, what is unreachable is, say that the server is running, but for some reason we are not able to reach the server properly. That means the server is running up and running, but we are not able to reach. So that is what we call it as U. And suppose if a server is down and it is not able to bring back to its original state, then we call it as recovery. And suppose everything is fine and you are able to connect to the server properly, then by default it goes with none or yen. Okay, in the same way, now as I said, when you run Nagios against a server for a service, now if a service is successfully run or not, that is again dependent on the states what it returns. Okay, suppose if it returns warning, which means that whatever value that you have, threshold that you have given, that it is trying to match, then it will be giving it as a warning. Okay, suppose if it is exceeding the threshold what you have given, then the state of the service means critical. Suppose, say that within the past run it was critical, but right now it is coming back to its normal state, then we call it as recovery. And in case, say that the service is not able to get any output, or if the service itself is not able to run, then you will be getting a state called as unknown. So say that you are trying to check some memory or whatever checks we were seeing, right? Suppose if this service is not able to run on that server, whatever you have specified, then by default it will be returning unknown. Okay, so these are the states which completely depends on what output that Nagios gives when it is trying to connect. So here, if you see, like I said, OK is nothing but the default one, which means it says that it is successful. But now if you see in this, warning means that you give certain value to it, and now when the value or the threshold is been reaching, then it is trying to say that it is warning. And here if you see, it says total process and it is warning. In case if you want to go and see the details completely, you can get it. Okay, now how many attempts it did, when it was trying to run, all those details it will get. Now, if you want to get more details about this, okay, I'll just show you 1 minute what it is trying to see. Okay, here. So what was this file? This was actually the template what we saw, right? So in the template, if you had seen here, for every time the notification options are DR, or if you go to see with something else, it'll be changing like this. It'll be UDR. That means whenever a service is running, and what situations you want to represent them. So that is when it is down or it is unreachable and it is recovery. So like that, any changes that you want to do, you can modify in the templates, whatever you have, because it is a default one and it is going to give you for every state of the host or every state of the service. Now, when you are modifying, literally you have to decide whether is it okay for you to display for everything, or is it okay to display only when you have criticalness. Warning and all can be neglected. In that case, when a server is down, only then it will reach and let you know. In case if it is unknown or recovering, you can just decide that whether to send or not to send. So let's quickly try to put the same thing, wherein we will add one more host. Now, typically to add one more host, we don't have another host right now. So what we'll do is we'll take the same local host, but we will give the complete name with the domain and see how it works. Okay. So first thing what we'll do is let's go to the local host. It's already opened. Okay, so the first thing is you have to add a host, right? So now let us take this example. Now let's say we need to add this server. Suppose this server is in remote server on which you want to do something and you want to check certain services on this, then typically first thing you need to know is you need to know the name of the server and the IP address of this. So now how do you do it? It's the same way wherein we will be defining the host using this same concept. So first I'll say define host. Okay, and then we'll say use, and like I said, we will be using the same template and there is no change in it. So I will use the same host. The only thing now it will be changing is what is the host name. Okay, now I'll say what's this? Host name is localhost, local domain. Okay, and alias is again, now I will say test server. Okay, it's just a name that I'm trying to give, and the address is going to be the same. Okay, so now if you see here, we are adding our own server to check. So like this, in case if you had any other server which you want to monitor, this is how you will be giving the details about it. So now the first thing is you have defined about the server. That is how Nagios should be connecting it and what is the IP address in the server to which Nagios should connect and check. So the next thing what you have to define is what is the checks that you are to do. So that is what is the important thing to define. So now comes the next part wherein you need to define all the services, because there might be lots and lots of services what you have. So first you need to decide what and all are the services that you need to check. Based on that, you need to add for each server that you would be checking. Okay, for example, let's try to put only this define services for ping. Okay, I want to check only ping, I don't want to do anything. So in that case, okay, so first let's try to quickly define a service. Okay, so now here we'll say use again the standard template what it is giving. In case if you are trying to modify certain template on, say that I want to do the check every 10 minutes, I don't want to do it on 5 minutes, then what will you do? First thing, you will come here. Either you have to use your own template or you create your own template and modify. If not, in the existing one, you simply come here and say here this is the interval wherein instead of 5 minutes you will be changing it to 10 minutes, so that whenever you use this template, it will try to say that okay, this template refers to 10 minutes run. So the service whatever that you're trying to run will be checked every 10 minutes against this server whatever you are trying to do. Okay, and now once you have specified the default values or the template, the next thing you need to say for which server you want to do, right? So let's take the same thing called as localhost.domain. Okay, or simply you can say your short version of the or the alias name what you have used. Okay, so once this is done, the next thing is again just a description what you're going to do. And what is the exact command that you want to do. Like I said, this is not the exact plugin which you're calling, but just the command. Now internally, this will be defined in your commands.cfg, wherein we are just using it. Now, once this is done, we will go and try to write our own plugin and see how to set it up. Okay, so that is what is more important, what you need to see, because in Nagios, it's all about understanding the configuration files or the CFG. So if you can just go through it once or a couple of times and just understand it, it's all about copy pasting and you can get the things done from yourself. So, okay, now here, like I said, these two values represents the warning and the critical. Okay, suppose if you change any values here, based on that, the output, whether it will say that if you're getting values near to 100 packs, then it means that it is warning. If it is more than 500, then it means critical. Okay, so now let's say I'll say 1. Okay, so just for the case if it needs to show a warning, I'm just trying to say here I'll say 2, or here I'll say 100 comma 60%. Okay, so fine. So what we have done is I've just added a new server called localhost domain with the domain name, which is nothing but a copy. And for that, we have put only one service. Now, by default, if you see, it will not be appearing it here because Apache wouldn't know anything about these checks what you have done. So every time you modify some config files, you have to restart your service so that it will try to reload. But even before that, first thing what you need to do is you need to check whether the configurations what you have done is correct. So how do you do it? Okay, so what you need to literally do is you need to verify the configuration files what you have done is correct or not. So because the first thing what you always call is the nagios.cfg, and internally using which this will be calling all the other files. So now since you have modified those two files, first thing what you do is you try to run this and verify whether the config file changes what you have done is fine. Okay, see now it is saying that there is some error that is found. Okay, because now if you try to restart Nagios, it wouldn't have come up. Now, what is the problem that it is saying? So look at this. If you can look, it is trying to parse through the file by file. First, the thing is it's going through nagios.cfg, and from that it is trying to read file by file, wherein okay, here it is. So it's saying that when it is trying to process the localhost.cfg at line 77, there is some mistake. Okay, here I have given it
There are
as
syntax.
syntax error. Okay, so go to line 77. Okay, so here instead of
When we write a check underscore ping after that 1 comma 20%,
mhm.
but we are seeing that upper side 100.0 comma 20. So I think the three words are there.
Which one? There.
Yeah, I think so.
Is that fine now?
Maybe.
I'm just checking the value. That's it. This is a separate value. I'm just using instead of 100, I'm just using 1 to just do some test. Okay, now it says that all these files, whatever you specified is fine. So now once we have made sure that the config files are fine, the next thing is we have to try to stop the Nagios service and bring that up. Okay, so quickly I'll say service Nagios stop, and we'll bring a service once again up. And now if you try to refresh, if you go to hosts, okay, now can you see along with the local host, it has added one more server for which we have added manually. Okay, and correspondingly, if you see it, it's just now connected, right? So it will take some time to update all the services. And now when you go to services here, if you see, we have added the ping. Now here, if you see, if you want to go check the details, there is no details because literally we had mentioned to use the template called what template? The local service. And here it says it will be happening it for 5 minutes, right? So it's not even 5 minutes since we enabled the service for that new server. So it will typically take the next 5 minutes. It will try to run this service and it will put all the details. So okay, so instead of that, what I'll do is quickly let's change this to 1. Okay, so that let it run every 1 minute. Fine. So again, since you have modified something, stop the service, start the service. Okay, so let's quickly wait for 1 minute and see how it works. Okay, so immediately it picked up. So now it is saying that the ping is okay, because here if you see it says that when it run, and currently if you see this is the time that it is trying to run, and the next schedule run is in the next 1 minute. So once it completes, the next time it will add it up the time. So like this you can know exactly how frequently it is running. Okay, and as I was saying, here everything is fine. Suppose if you want to change the value and see, you can literally know how these values would be changing. Suppose let's try to say even 1 is completely fine. Let me say minus. Let's see how it behaves. Okay, I have set it minus. Then let me stop the service. Start and refresh it. There's no packet loss, so let's just wait quickly. It's not yet checked. It's not even 1 minute over. Or is it not taking -1? Maybe we should add something else. Let's try process. Okay, so here there is something called total process, right? Let's check this. Check local procs. Um, okay, so warning critical. Okay, first value is warning and second is critical. So how many number of processes that it is running? Okay, let's maybe we can try this. Object. Check underscore procs. Okay, what does the service do? Now check underscore procs. Okay, check underscore processor service, which is going to check how many processes are running. So in case if you have more number of processes running, then it is going to give a problem. So let's do one thing. Let's try to use the same. Okay, now let me just paste it here. So now instead of the, what is the host name that we gave here? Okay, so let me just copy this. And let me just paste it here. Okay, so let's stop, start. Okay, actually, now it is showing. So literally, if you see now, since I gave -1, it is not able to get any value out of it because -1 is not a proper value. So that is why it is clearly saying that whatever value you have given, it's not able to run it. Okay, so that is why the status is shown as unknown. Okay, so suppose if you try to refresh, you will get it. Now, here if you say, typically it is showing warning by default because the number of processes that is running in it is what? 304. Wherein if what you have specified here in this is if you have 250 processes running in this current server, whatever you want to check, then you display it as warning. And whenever it reaches 400, then display it as critical. But now if you see, it is saying that there are 304 processes running. So if you want, you can just check. Oh, it's running close to 400. Okay, but when the time it was checking, it was close to 304. So that is why, okay, sorry. Now it is not considering all the process, but it is considering the process which are zombie, which are stale, which means a parent process which triggered a process. Now after that, it is not able to connect or call or talk to its original parent where it was triggering. Okay, so it is picking up only those process in which have not been working properly. So in that case, the count is 304. Okay, now in the same case, now if I change some values here, you can see that the status will also be changing. Suppose, for example, if we say, if I say the critical is 300. Okay, now only bad thing is every time you have to stop and start. Okay, so let's wait for just quickly a minute so that from warning it should go to critical, because in the critical we have specified 300. Now since it has reached 300, which is the warning, no, the critical state, immediately it will come. Now like that, if you see, it will be giving you a total table. So that is one advantage of using Nagios here, because it will be showing proper tables for everything. Because quickly, when you want to know, say that you have 25 or 30 servers that you want to monitor, and you can just look at this table wherein it will say that how many things are working, how many services are particularly failing, so that you can completely get an idea. And typically, if you want to go and see what exactly is failing, then you go to this particular checks or services, and that will give you the complete details of what is not working. Okay. So come up. Okay, now you see it is saying critical. Why? Because here in the definition, we have said that the second parameter to be 300, wherein the second parameter stands for what is the critical range that you have to say. So in that case, each plugin that you internally use will be having different values. So here, see this. This is the command wherein if you see, this command is internally going to call this plugin called checkprocs. So for that, you're passing values wherein the first value stands for the warning range, the second value stands for critical, and the third says what kind of services or what kind of state of the process that you want to check. And that is what here you are saying it as RSZDT. Okay, so basically all these things are the state of process. So if you run ps-ef, you will be getting certain states here. Okay, and that is what internally it is using to check. So like this, if you have any specific service that you want to add, you can use the default plugins, whatever we have. So if you typically go to this libexe folder, you see all these things, whatever you see are the default plugins wherein each one is used for a specific purpose. But if you see, the real question what comes is, now okay, we had a server which I just tried to show you by adding how to add it, but typically how is it going to connect and how is it going to work? That is what is more important, which we need to understand. Okay, so in that case, everything happens through plugins. So like I said, Nagios is going to run a daemon, so that is going to basically use or make use of plugins correspondingly, and through that plugins, it will be working on exactly what is the task that you want to do. So in that case, there's pretty much lots of default plugins that is available, and since it is open source, you can get all those plugins from here. Now if you see, when you install Nagios or when we try to build the plugins.tar from scratch, we have got so many plugins which it is giving it as by default, but that doesn't mean that we will be having all the checks or the plugins which is needed for our use case. But in sometimes what will happen is we might have to work on some plugin wherein there is some specific check which we need to do by ourselves. Okay, so in that case, what is that we can do is what we need to write our own plugin. So when you're writing your own plugin, it is not mandatory that this is how you should be writing. It can be pretty much a JavaScript, not to that level. It can be a shell script, Perl script, or a Python script, wherein you define what you need to do in that check. But what is important that you need to try to understand is, so if you see in this page, now how does it knows it is critical? Because there is some server which is present in the remote, right? So when it is trying to connect to that remote server, what happens is the service whatever that you are running is internally through a plugin. So when you run exactly this plugin on the remote server, so now for example, say that it is trying to run the service called check process. That means what internally it does is it will be running this plugin called checkprocs in that specific server on which you have set it to run. So in that case, whenever this plugin completes its execution, it will try to return some value to Nagios. Okay, so that is what Nagios will be capturing in a file called status.dat that will be present in the var folder. So as soon as plugin completes its run, it will be trying to send or return some value which will be stored by Nagios, and based on that it will be trying to display the output here. So in that case, when you are writing your own plugin, then it is important for us to return a proper status. Okay, that means by default if you try to return a status or exit with a zero value, then that means the execution of the plugin is successful, and Nagios will be correspondingly marking the state or the output as everything is okay. Suppose if you want to exit it as 1, then it will try to consider that it is not working or it is not successful. Okay, so that is what is very important that you need to do it. So it is not just writing up a particular plugin or a script, but returning the status. Based on that, Nagios can decide whether what you have run is completely successful or not. Because if not, what will happen if say that you write some script, okay, and you ask Nagios to run it, so Nagios will be simply running it. Now whether it was successful or not, Nagios will not be worried, because every time it runs, if the script ran completely, then Nagios will assume that it has successfully completed. But whether the output of that plugin is exactly what you need, it will not be tracking. So anything that you want to display here, then you should be returning that value from the script or your plugin what you have written. So that is why whenever you're trying to write something, it is pretty much important that you need to give this. Okay, now the question comes is, suppose if I write my own plugin, then how is that you will be giving? Okay, so for example, just assume that we just try to write some small script wherein we will try to see what is the CPU utilization, and we will print whether it is warning or not. So based on that, how do we work? So typically, don't worry about what is the script going to do. Okay, this is the script wherein I'm just trying to run as typical CPU utilization and trying to say how much is the memory used. Okay, so assume that this is the small Perl script which we have written. Now in order to check this, what you need to do is, first let's try to store it. So now uh, okay, let's go to the libexe folder. Okay, so now here I'll say one name. So let me say my plugin. Okay, so I'll say my plugin.pl and we'll store this. Okay, don't worry about all the syntax, and also after this, the next module will be Perl. So that is when we'll be going through all those things. Okay, so now simply we have done. Just cross check whether the plugin is okay. And now literally just try to run one and see how it behaves. Okay, so it's trying to say it is warning. Why? Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to run this command called top. Okay, from this I am trying to take the CPUs. Okay, let me just show you what this does. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get the number of CPUs that is present in this local server. Okay, and from that, what I'm trying to say is suppose it's just a dummy check what I'm trying to do. Arg0, it's nothing but the input that I'm giving. Suppose if I am giving the number of parameters to the script, if that is less than 3, then that means it is a warning. That means typically if you see I have not passed any parameter to the script, so it will always be 0. Okay, so the question is 0 less than 3? Typically it is there, so that is the reason it is always trying to print warning here. So it's just a dummy script what I've put in. There's no particular logic, so don't worry about what I've written. But the point here is, suppose if whatever check you want to do, if it is matching this condition, then it is going to come out with a exit status 1, and correspondingly if it returns exit status 0, or if it is coming out with an statement of 0, then it will Nagios will correspondingly consider this as success. Okay, now let's try to use the same plugin and see how that we have to use. So for that, as I said, the only thing what you need to do is starting with defining the command, and specifically to what is that you have done to this. And in that case, if you see, here is the important thing what you need to do, wherein when you're trying to run the plugin, you need to give the exact command line on what and all are the parameters that you have to use specific to this. Okay, and suppose, say, let me try to run this. If I say, it still says that, right? Let me say 2, 3, 4. See? Now, if the number of arguments that I'm passing is greater, it is actually greater than the CPU utilization, then it is going to give me as okay. Now, since the value was 3, okay, now I am passing the parameters as 3 parameters. Is 3 less than 3? Typically, this it doesn't know what to do in that, so that is why it is giving it as okay. Suppose if I give anything less than that, then it is going to say that it is warning. Okay, so that is what it literally means. So suppose if I don't give any parameters, then it is going to give me a warning. So the input for this script is very simple. So either you pass some parameter or you don't pass. So that is what here we have to write the command in the same way. Okay, so in that case, now let's go to the commands.cfg. Okay, so first thing is, let's try to add our own command specific to what we have written. So first, let's take our own command here. Okay, so first let's define our command. That is the plugin what we are going to use. Okay, so here we're going to say what is the name of the command. So the command's name is, let's take my plugin or test plugin. So since it's always a good practice to use the same name as what you're going to give for the script, it is better. Okay, and then you have to say what exactly is the command line. Okay, now when you say the command line here, how is that it is going to invoke? You are going to call this file which is present in which directory? It is present in the user local Nagios, right? Now in this case, if you see, we have used a macro which specifies this, right? So in that case, let's try to reuse the macros which is present. And if you remember where you have defined, you would have defined it in the, where exactly? In the resource.cfg, right? You have specified this. So reusing this value will actually get the whole value of this one. So here we will simply say $user1. I'll say $user1. Okay, and in that, what is that you are going to call? We are going to call our script or our plugin, that is myplugin.pl. Okay, and to this, do you have to pass any parameter is what you need to decide, whether you have to pass the parameter or you don't have to pass the parameter. Okay, suppose as you see here, if you want, you can pretty much call any script by passing some parameter, but in our case we don't have to pass any parameters. In case if you're trying to pass some parameters, then what you need to do is typically here whatever values that you want to pass, you will be passing it, wherein you will be reading that value from the earlier command. If not, let's just keep it as it is. Okay, so now this is done. So now what we need to do is we need to add a service through which we will be calling this, right? So going back to the service here, now let's define one more service for what the plugin that we have done. So let's use again the default template. Okay, our test plugin. Okay, and here comes the check command, what you have to use. So now here we have to use the name of whatever that we have given in the command name. So here I'm going to just simply say my underscore plugin. Okay, and now do you have to pass any parameters? Suppose if you have to pass any parameters, then here we will use colon followed by certain values here, so that whenever you come here, that values would be taken up here. And so that suppose if you're passing some parameter, then what will you say? Here you will say $argv1. Okay, so that whatever the values that you are passing it here, suppose if you say some value here 1, so what it will do, the first parameter would be taken and it will be stored into this values that what you are running it here. Okay, so pretty much if you don't want, you can just delete it so that it will not take. And the same thing, if you don't want to pass any parameter, you can just leave this as it. So now what it is going to do, every minute for this server called localhost called local domain, it is going to call the service wherein internally it is going to call our plugin. Okay, so let's try to stop and quickly check the service. Okay, service Nagios stop and start. Okay, so let's see here. So now it is trying to call our plugin here. Okay, whatever that we are given. So the next 1 minute, it should be pretty much running that. There you go. Okay. It's simply saying that the plugin is not executable. It's not able to run the plugin what you have given. So it is trying to say a written code. So why? It is because your plugin is not executable. So if you just change to my plugin, so the next run it should take. But other than that, did you guys get what exactly it is? So when you're trying to add your own plugin, what is important is you need to define the command. So for that, what you will be doing is you go to the commands.cfg and internally you define what is that plugin or the script where you have run. But what's more important in that plugin is whenever you are writing a plugin, you have to correspondingly make sure that you are returning some value, because whatever values that you return, only by that Nagios will be trying to understand whether the plugin has successfully completed, or is it a warning, or what it is going to happen. Okay, so that is what is more important when you try to work. Are you getting it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a little bit, weird, wherein unless and until you don't go through the config files, it not be looking so straightforward. But as I said, it's all in the template wherein you don't have to worry much about things. Okay. So now literally the important things are when you need to know how you're defining this plugin. That is one, and what plugin or script that you're trying to write. But until now, if you see, I didn't even tell you exactly how you will be connecting it to the server. Because until now, what we were seeing is, okay, if you had this question, now we defined some plugin, okay, we defined something about some server, but typically, if the server is some other remote server, then how will it be able to access these plugins? Because where is this plugins present? All these plugins, whatever you're saying, is present in your local server. Now, when you have a remote server on which you want to run this, how is that plugin is going to be available in that? Because in this, if you say, what is that you are trying to say here? You are just saying that when you call this command, you go to this directory and run this. Now, this directory is present in your local host, wherein the check or this plugin which you want to run is on a different server. Now, how is that you are going to connect and run? That is what the important thing. So in that case, if you see, when we have installed Nagios, we have just installed only the server. So just like this, we need to install something called as a Nagios client on each of the server on which you need to do a connection. So we have something called as NRPE client, where you install the Nagios client, and through that client you will be trying to connect to that server and work. But typically one of the drawback with that is, if you have 100 servers, then on all of the 100 servers you have to go and install the client. Okay, so instead of doing it, what we are trying to use is plugin. So again, the question comes is, the plugin whatever that we have created is present in my local server. Now, how will that be present in the remote server so that you can do the check? So that is what, there is one more method of installing Nagios client, which is nothing but connecting or checking using SSH, which means what you're trying to do is, typically you are trying to connect to a server, whatever that you have specified here, localhost, or in our case, I just gave you one sample, this server, right? So from your localhost where you have installed Nagios, it is going to do a SSH to this server and then run this plugin what you have specified. Okay, now using that concept, it is going to run the checks and get the output. But now still the question remains the same. Okay, maybe instead of installing client on all this server, what we can do is we can use a plugin which internally Nagios uses called check by SSH. So what it is going to do in that way is it is going to connect from your local host on which Nagios is installed to the particular remote server and then run this plugin in that server. So for that, again, these plugins has to be present in that particular client machine or in that remote server. So for that, what we do as a best practice is you use or make use of the NFS mounts, which means you try to put this libexe folder content, whatever you have, into some directory which can be shared across all the servers. So that means typically when you are trying to connect by SSH to a remote server, if you go to that remote server, you should be able to access this plugins in a directory which is present in that server. So you have to work it out in such a way that you just copy these files, put into a directory which can be shared across all the servers. So that can be possible through the NFS mount. Okay, so now what will happen is no matter how many new servers that you want to check, all you have to do is you just have to mount that directory which contains these files. So now say that I just mount it in a directory called slash home slash Nagios, something like that. So every remote server which I want to check or I want to run Nagios against it, simply mount that directory. So that can be taken care by the system administrator. You don't have to worry even about that. So all you have to tell them is I need this complete set of files to be shared across all the servers. For that, you just need to create a mount so that when you just bring up a new remote server, you just mount the directory so that you will be getting all these details. So that what will happen is when Nagios tries to connect to a remote server through SSH, the difference is it will not be calling your plugin which is present in your directory. Okay, it should be calling this plugin which is present in the remote. So how that is going to connect, let's just see that internally. Okay, so typically instead of using the Nagios client, what you can do is you can use a plugin called check by SSH. Now what this is going to do is it is going to connect to your client. So typically in the Nagios server, you will be having your plugins, right? So until now, if you see, since the check what we wanted to do was on our local host directly, we were calling the plugin directly. But now, when you have the server on a remote place, so in that case, what you will do is instead of calling the plugin directly, first you will call this plugin from the Nagios against the server which you want to connect. So what this plugin will do is if you pass some parameters to this, this plugin will connect to the remote server or the client through SSH, and in that SSH when it is connected, whatever parameters that you have passed, that parameters will be nothing but the plugin name. So it will go to that server which you have mentioned through SSH. In that, it will go and try to access the plugins which is present by the mount. Okay, so this is how simply even instead of installing the client, all you have to do is install this directory where you will get all the plugins. So Nagios will try to connect through SSH to this client, and after connecting through SSH, it will run the plugin wherever you have mounted or you have shared the directory. So that is the different. But until now, since we were trying to do the check on our local server itself, it was directly running the plugins. But when you have to connect to the remote server, first you have to use a plugin called check by SSH, wherein check by SSH will first connect to the server using SSH, and once it is connected, in the mount wherever you have specified the plugin is available, there it will go and access it. Okay, so that is what you will be literally doing it in the production. So if you don't want to use this plugin, then you have to typically install the Nagios client, because again it is going to be a big headache. So instead of that, it is always preferable, and it is also easy to work on this concept, because SSH will always be done internally, right? So you can just extend a plugin called check by SSH. Okay, so the difference is, now when you have a remote server, what you do is, first you configure the check by SSH, wherein Nagios is going to first call this plugin every 5 minutes or 1 minute, what you have specified. And once it is specified, it will typically go and connect to the client. And in the client, you will be sharing whatever plugins that you had in the server to this client using some mount. So you go inside that mount and try to run it.
Actually, you are saying that first plugin which is running at the client side, it is checked by SSH.
Exactly.
Okay. And when we use this plugin, we don't need any plugins of the connectivity like that NRP and something else, huh?
NRP is actually a Nagios client service. So first, if you remember in the first class, we downloaded a
Hmm.
tar called Nagios Core. So that was the parent or the master Nagios. But how will you connect to the client? That is what is important, right? Because until now, whatever checks I showed you, it was a local host. But now when you have a server which is in the remote, how will Nagios try to connect that and try to run the checks? That is what is important, right? So if you install that NRP client, and then once you configure that NRP client to this servers, so that Nagios will be acting as a server and client. But for that, you need to install the NRP client on each of the remote servers. Like I
Right.
said, you will have 20, then you will be adding another 10. So for each and every server which you want to monitor, you have to keep on installing the NRP client. So instead of that, what you can do is, you can simply make use of this plugin called check by SSH, wherein instead of running the plugins directly, you will first run the check by SSH. You specify to this check by SSH to which server or which is the client to which you need to connect, and in that what and all you want to check, so that this will take care of that. And if you want to see an example, now if you see this here, so now until now, if you remember, we were giving a parameter as what? Directly we were using. Okay, let me show you this, what it's the difference. So here, for example, let me take some other existing plugin so that you can easily understand. Uh, what was that? There was check ping, right? Okay, now here, if you see, this is what it will do when you want to check it for the local server, right? But now, what is our need is? Our need is to run it on a remote server. So in that case, what you will do is, simply instead of calling this directly, you will be calling the check by SSH first. Okay, so that means here I'll just, first thing what you will do is, you will call this plugin. So that means every 5 minutes or 1 minute what you have specified to run, Nagios will try to run this plugin against the server. What server? Some server which you want to connect, wherein once it runs this, it will be connecting it to this server. Okay, that is what this plugin is going to do. So when you give this command, you don't worry about this. Only thing is first this. Now every 5 minutes, what it will do, it will try to run this plugin, and it will try to connect to a server which you have specified. Okay, now once it connects to the server, fine, it is able to connect. Now other than connecting, it has to run some plugin, right? Now where is the check by SSH plugin running, it is connecting to the server wherever the remote server that you have specified, and it is running here, correct? Now in that case, you need to call this plugin, whatever that you are interested to run. Okay, so that plugin will be present in a separate directory. So what you have to do is you need to give the path where this plugin is available in this client. So in that case here, if you see, okay, let me just show you first. Okay, so here you need to pass the specific host name. So now what where is that? So here you will say, why is it going there? Okay, so here you will say, okay, so you will say what is the you want to come. Okay, so I'm just giving it. It's not, instead of this, if you want, you can pass the parameter and you will say here the remote server name. Okay, so now what it will do is, first it will, whenever that 5 minutes or 1 minute's time that you have specified, it will come here and it will try to run this command. Okay, wherein first thing is it will connect to this remote server whatever you have specified using this plugin. So now first thing is, from this Nagios server you are connecting to the client using this plugin called check by SSH. Okay, what you have done is now you have just connected. After you connect, what is that we need to do? We need to perform some check. So that has been done using by some plugin. Okay, now for example, when you take this check ping plugin or whatever other plugin you said, all those things were present in the Nagios server. So now, as I said, you will share all the plugins whatever you have in the Nagios server with other clients or other remote servers through some mount. So now say that I have mounted a directory called /home/Nagios, which points to the libexe folder of my Nagios, so that all these plugins whatever I have here is visible inside my client in the directory called /home/Nagios. So now after connecting to this, I will go to that /home/Nagios. In that, whatever plugin that you wanted to run exactly, you will run. So here, if I do the same thing, is what now it will be changing. So now here, so now after connecting to this remote server, you need to pass some parameters. So that is what it will be running there. So simply you just say what is that you want to run. So like I said, you say /home/Nagios and this. So now what it will do is, once it is connecting to the server, typically it will try to run this plugin which is present inside the /home/Nagios of where? Of this remote server or the client. So after that, it will be running exactly all the commands what you have to give. So whenever you are using a remote server, this is what you will be doing, because in the production this is the only difference. All you have to do is, until now if you see, you were calling it directly from this directory, wherein this directory represents your local server, right, which is nothing but /user local nagios libexe. But now when you are running on the production, you will not be running this on your same server. You will be running it on a remote server. So for that, first you just have to append this line wherein you are trying to connect to that remote server using this plugin called check by SSH. And after that, you are trying to run as it is, wherein you need to specify the mount path where you have written. So what you can do is, just for this directory, you can again use some variable and you can store it in resources.cfg and you just replace that value. So that is the only difference. So simply add this value called check by SSH and you give the server name, so that typically it will be connected to that server. Okay, so that is the only difference what you'll be doing, because why I'm specifying on this is, here if you see, no matter how many services that you do, you just have to give it once and you have to mount it. If not, if you're typically using the NRP clients, that is pretty old one, wherein you have to install the NRP client on each and every server, which is again a time consuming, and there is no much automation present in that.
Okay, one more thing I want to ask, that when we are doing SSH on another remote server, then it will ask yes and no, and one more thing, that password. Why it will take, sorry, how will it take?
Exactly. So that is what the next thing what I wanted to show you is, in those case, now if you see, you are connecting to some other server, right? So typically it will ask for password when you are running this SSH. So that is when you have to create a passwordless SSH. Okay,
Okay,
so
okay.
okay, now that is what we have to do, is creating a passwordless SSH. So
Mm-hmm.
passwordless SSH is a concept wherein whenever you connect to a different server using the same user ID, it should not ask any password. It should just directly allow you to go inside it. So in that case, what you need to do is, you need to have an account called Nagios in all of the client servers. Okay, so once you have the same account, so you can run this SSH, wherein you have to set up certain configurations called private and public keys, so that when you try to do a SSH using this public keys, it will try to recognize who is the user that you are trying to connect, and it will not ask you any password.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so now what will happen for that is, typically there will be a directory called .ssh in your home directory. Okay, now in that, what you have to do is, you have to run this command called generate the key, or SSH key generator, wherein what this is going to do is, inside your home directory, right? Specifically, like I said, you will be running all these things as Nagios. So inside the Nagios user's home directory, there will be a .ssh folder which is created. Inside that, you will be creating a file called as RSA and .pub, which is nothing but the public key which we'll be generating. So you simply copy this file, and no matter what servers or the remote servers that you want to connect, just go to that and create a file called authorized keys and copy the content to it. Okay, so simply if you do that, for example, as I was saying, there is one remote server, right? Now, in this server, try to generate this key. Once you generate for the first time, that is enough. After that, try to copy this file and put it inside this authorized key in the servers. So like that, when you try to put, the next time when you try to do SSH, when it connects, it will go to this authorized key and it will get the values. And now it will recognize, okay, it is the same user who is trying to connect, so it will not ask any password. Okay, so again, this
Okay,
will be
okay.
done by the system administrator, wherein you can do passwordless SSH. Again, if it is a question on how do you generate a passwordless SSH, you can typically just say this is the command using which you will generate. And if you want to know how will you copy this file from this server to a remote server, there are a lot of ways that you can copy. So uh, one of the ways, like, you can use the internal command which the SSH gives. So if you can just use the SSH copy ID, it will typically copy the file from where you specify the server to the remote server which you are specifying. So automatically it will copy that also. So you don't even have to do it manually. Just put it in one script and give all the 25 or 30 remote servers or whatever 100 servers you have, just you specify this, automatically it will be copying it to all the places.